humanity is a history of human seeking.
Almost since the beginning of Christianity, stories of the shroud that wrapped Jesus' body have been foremost.
And the evidence that's been obtained by scientific research has really been quite extraordinary.
I mean, the shroud is the best visual aid in the world to tell the story of the Passion of Jesus Christ.
The Shroud of Turin is a cloth, dates the time of Christ.
The image of a crucified man.
You see the depth of suffering that he underwent. The whiplashes down his back and down his front. Whiplash across his face. Just the nailing through his hands and through his feet. This body that's so badly beaten, so badly tortured.
That is a message that our world needs to hear.
It's an absolute living miracle that you can actually see.
I think it's something unique, big emotion.
This was the true burial cloth that was used to cover the body of Jesus Christ in the tomb.
In what it teaches us of the nature of the Passion of Christ.
Jerusalem. The shroud has spent some time in Jerusalem and has traveled through the Holy Land to places like Edessa. In 949 AD, the image of Edessa, the Mandylion, arrived with great celebration and rejoicing in Constantinople, the center of the Byzantine kingdom, where it was kept away from the public and only visiting dignitaries and royalty could actually see it. But 25 years later, the Emperor John Zimisces decided that he wanted to put the face of Christ on his circulating bronze coins. That the engravers who were engraving the coins of the bronze coins of the Byzantine Empire had an opportunity to see up close the shroud which was there in Constantinople. And I think this provides compelling evidence that the Shroud of Turin is not a late medieval forgery at all. It is actually dating from the 1st century and was once known as the Mandylion or the Edessa cloth.
In Edessa, Turkey, a cloth bearing the image of Christ, nicknamed the Holy Mandylion, was known about long before the appearance of the Shroud of Turin.
The Holy Mandylion appeared for certain during the 6th century, and it was discovered after the town of Edessa was flooded. It was hidden. Relics were always being hidden in walls. So there it was, hidden behind some stones, and after a flood, repairs were ordered by the Byzantine emperor, and the relic was discovered. After the flood, it was immediately recognized as a Keropoetis, which means a divinely wrought image. Only a face can be seen on the cloth.
According to some historians, people who specialize in the history of the shroud, what is referred to as the Holy Mandylion from the town of Edessa is actually the same cloth as the Shroud of Turin.
The Shroud of Turin is a centuries-old linen cloth. The shroud bears a faint image of a man, which many believe is Jesus, showing signs of crucifixion wounds. Its history begins in the Middle Ages, with the first documented appearance in France in the 14th century. Throughout history, it's been a subject of veneration and controversy.
Other sources say that it was a gift or a legacy of some sort. Whatever the case may be, the shroud was publicly displayed for the first time in 1357 at the church in Lille, France. The presence of this extraordinary relic attracted pilgrims from the entire region. Over the years, Lille became a pilgrimage site.
The shroud continues to be an important relic for many, drawing pilgrims and scholars alike, symbolizing faith, mystery, and the intersection of science and religion.
Important relics, such as the Shroud of Turin, are objects which have been used to inspire devotion over many, many years. Even though they've been kept in places which are meant to be very, very safe, occasionally tragedies can occur. So in 1532, when it was locked in a container in a chapel in Chambéry in France, the chapel caught fire. And the shroud was very nearly destroyed. Today we see the markings of scorch marks and burn holes, which are a consequence of that fire. It's protected as far as possible by the authorities who own the shroud from any damage, and for that reason the shroud is displayed very, very intermittently. Only rarely is it taken out of its current place of storage. Since 1898, when the shroud was photographed for the first time, we discovered that when you reverse the colors on the shroud, as in a photographic negative, then what this produces is what appears to be a photograph like an anatomically perfect man, something which is totally unexpected from having viewed the shroud in its natural color.
The shroud is a negative, and so seeing the photographic negative, we see the positive of the image. And this was a very important date because it started in this moment the modern scientific history of the shroud.
We've had a series of scientific discoveries. Perhaps the most important discovery that we've made concerns the formation of the image, because there are so many qualities that this image has which are unique and difficult to understand and difficult to explain.
The actual image itself, when you actually begin to look at it, again, is unlike anything the medieval world, or indeed later, has been able to produce. The marks of crucifixion that appear on the body show that the nails penetrated the wrists. Evidence of dust and rock samples, and the rock samples at the feet that would have actually been on the feet of the man who was wrapped in the shroud have actually been tested, and they've been found to perfectly match limestone discovered in Jerusalem.
We know that Jesus was scourged violently, extremely violently. The images on the shroud, it's very, very clear from that. This was a brutal torture that he had to endure.
Where he was slapped around the cheek, there's a whiplash to the cheeks, there's the crown of thorns that thrust on his head with the blood flow that comes from it. The wounds of the whiplash that go from the tops of the shoulders down to the bottom of the legs, on both the front and the back of the man of the shroud. The cross that he carried that smudges those wounds across the shoulders. There's the dislocated right shoulder from falling. There's bruised knees. There's a bruise to the tip of the nose and a deviated septum of the nose. And then there's the awful indignity of being crucified naked, with nails through his wrists, the lower part of his hands, through his feet. And I think an ordinary person would have died of the scourge wounds alone, but somehow he had the will to go through it, to stay till that last moment before there was time enough for the burial before the Passover.
So it's fascinating that just this discovery of the shrunken blood cells gives us an indication of not only the extent of the suffering that Jesus suffered, but it also fits in with the known tortures that we can see Jesus must have endured on that day.
The shroud's blood stains would have been tested, and they were found to be human, and they were found to actually be AB. The other thing that's very interesting as well is that many people have wondered why the blood still shows up as red on the actual shroud. And if it's 2,000-year-old blood, why does it still show up as red? And the answer to that is it contains very high levels of an enzyme called bilirubin. And bilirubin is actually produced by the body when it is under extreme pain and torture. And the shroud blood, as you might expect, is full of bilirubin. And that's what still gives it its reddish properties today.
His forgiveness, his love, and his example of how we should live our lives. So I think it's, as we have seen people come and the impact it has on them, the world needs the message of the shroud to bring the reality of Jesus' suffering to a world that so needs it, that so needs his peace, which passes all understanding. The shroud brings hope to people that have got no hope. There are so many people with no hope, and he is our hope.
Non è un'immagine, è una... si sente come se ci fosse una presenza.
Non lo so, già stando qui ho la pelle d'oca. Non lo so quanto la vedrò, che effetto.
Oui, ça ressemble beaucoup, mais enfin on voudrait évidemment, comme tout le monde, être sûr.
The depth of his love for us, that he would do this for us, so undeservingly, so undeserving. And yet that love is beyond anything we can imagine. And so I hope that people seeing the shroud will have a glimpse of how deeply they are loved, how important they are to God, however marginalized or broken they may feel, that God himself chose to be broken on a cross to save them is amazing.
We've then taken that further. We discovered that through tests that were done in the mid-70s using some specific equipment, we discovered that the shading on the shroud actually possesses three-dimensional information, which enables an accurate profile of the body and the face of the man in the shroud.
We also have the carbon-14 testing, which has now been largely discredited by anybody who wants to actually consider and examine the evidence.
Then there was a 5-day examination that took place of the shroud by a team of 30 scientists from the United States. They studied the shroud for 7 days. And their primary objective in making that study was to work out how the image has been formed. What is the image composed of and how was it made? Studying all the photographs, X-ray photographs, fluorescence photographs, ultraviolet photographs, studying samples of material that they extracted from the surface of the shroud. After 3 years, with all that expertise, they still couldn't work out how the image was formed, and they couldn't reproduce the image. And that still pertains today. We still cannot reproduce the shroud image.
Many people have tried to replicate the image with varying degrees of success. I believe that the closest anyone has come to replicating the image was actually shining ultraviolet light against the cloth, and they were able to achieve a slight discoloration of the cloth, which replicates many of the properties that we see of the image on the shroud. However, even with 21st century technologies, there is not enough ultraviolet light in the world to replicate a full body image front and back. All of the evidence The image itself, and indeed the information that we found on the cloth, shows that no medieval forger would have been able to have put all that together.
There are some properties of this remarkable cloth which cannot be explained even by today's technology, even by today's instrumentation, and by any scientist. We still don't know how the image was formed. We still cannot replicate the image. Even using today's instrumentations, today's methods, let alone the techniques that were available to a medieval artist or somebody in the bygone times. That really confirms that there is something really quite extraordinary and quite remarkable about this cloth, sets it apart from any historical object that we have ever come across.
That death isn't the end. There's something magnificent beyond that, something beyond our imaginations, beyond what we could possibly countenance, that there is an eternity, that there is life beyond the grave, that Jesus rose from the dead. There is such hope for us as Christian pilgrim people. In the Shroud of Turin, we see that Jesus suffered for our sake, but he also calls us to pick up our cross and follow him. Now, that cross is not going to be the kind of burden that he bore, but for some people it is a great and difficult thing to carry. But we are called to follow him and to love others as he loved us, selflessly and with all the ounce of energy and strength that we may have.
We are left with an enigma, a great mystery of our age. When we look at the Shroud of Turin, we see not only a man who has been crucified to death. The shroud is like a receipt. It's God's receipt to us. It shows that our price has been paid for. We can look at this incredible receipt and we can see everything that we need to know about how Jesus died and, more importantly, how he rose from the dead. And for me, that makes the shroud the most incredible object in the world.
I first heard about the shroud just a few weeks before our only child died, when I saw an advert for a film about the shroud that reenacted the death of Jesus. And as we watched the film, it was as though Jesus' suffering and our suffering came together. And then just weeks later, Zoe died in hospital. In the midst of all that, we had the wonderful experience of meeting Jesus. His spirit filled the room, and we felt a peace which passes all understanding. And that was a turning point in our lives. And because of that experience, the Lord has given us an abundance of blessing through the death of our daughter. So I can never separate our daughter Zoe from the shroud.
Thousands of people that have been flooding in through this exhibit to see the most studied archaeological object in the history of the world, the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. We have a life-size replica behind us here. We also have 24 brand new didactic panels beautifully on display. We have the instruments of torture, the crown of thorns, the Roman flagrum, the spear that pierced the side of Christ, reconstructions all based on the scientific and historical data that comes for us from the Shroud of Turin.
Here it is in its full length. It's very faint, the image, so here is the face of the man of the shroud. The spear wound is here. Here are the arms crossed, coming down to the feet here.
His image imprinted on a linen cloth confirmation of his resurrection. Many will see and believe. Will you? I think it says everything about my journey with the shroud.
And the story and the message of the Shroud of Turin is the message of the love of God for us. What it cost him to save us. We've seen the brutality of the crucifixion, and we've seen a glimpse of the power of the resurrection that raised Christ from the dead. And that is the story of the Shroud of Turin.
Why does the Shroud of Turin matter? It's not just about scientific mystery or ancient linen. The shroud confronts every person, believer, skeptic, or sinner, with a deeper question. What did it cost God to love us? Each wound, each bloodstain, each scourge tells the story of Christ's excruciating suffering, a silent witness to the greatest act of love in history. The bond that man destroyed by taking the bite of a fruit, God restored by offering himself on the cross and providing us himself as eternal life-giving food. There is no greater love than this.